So just recently, we covered everything you need to know about the sweeping changes coming to the Hunter class in Season 21. The PvE sandbox is changing massively in regards to each class's underperforming roaming supers, multiple abilities, and some aspects seeing their fragment slots increase. In this video, it's all about the Titans. They've got even more updates and changes to their kits than even the Hunters do, so we have a load to talk about. Also, stay tuned for our Warlock focus video because that will be coming soon after this one. Now, starting with our Titan changes. First off, Fist of Havoc is seeing a bunch of changes. This is on top of the PvE damage increase it saw at the beginning of Lightfall. I know, a lot of us completely forgot about that. Bungie still hasn't seen an increase though in its usage in high difficulty content, likely due to the fact that Thunder Crash is just one and done. It does enough damage, and for the most part, no one's really like, yo, pop that Fist of Havoc on Nezarec. Now, Fist of Havoc is the arc super, where you supercharge your fists and slam the ground with the force of a maelstrom. While active, you can quickly charge forward, which is your line attack, dealing damage to any impacted targets, or you could slam your fists to the ground, which is your heavy attack, dealing damage in an area around you and leaving aftershocks in your wake. And performing a slam in the air deals additional damage. Now, it has been a long time since this super has been a favorite in PvE. Matter of fact, the last time I even remember Fist of Havoc even being the play was when Bottom Tree Striker was the reigning king inside of PvP because it just lasted so long. But dude, that was like years ago. Now we're gonna go over the changes and a few exotic synergies to see if this might change things in Season 21. Across the board, it's getting its super cost reduced for each attack. Light attacks costing 6%, down from 8.5%, and the heavy attack costs reduced to 12%, down from 18%. Guys, that's pretty significant. Essentially, your super is gonna last longer. But not only that, we're seeing a whopping buff of 33% in its heavy attack damage. Guys, that's applicable to not only the heavy attack, but also the aftershocks that are left after that heavy attack, which when it comes to like locking down an area, this is second to none. Now, the heavy attack will blind targets near the center of the slam area. And this is Bungie trying to really open up our Light 3.0 subclasses, trying to tie them into those verbs, with Fist of Havoc gaining access to that blind verb, something that even Thunder Crash doesn't have. And what this technically means is we should be able to go in there and stun an unstoppable champion with our heavy attack from Fist of Havoc. Now, there's a few exotics that pair directly with Fist of Havoc. You've got Eternal Warrior, which comes with the perk Resolute, where you gain an overshield when activating Fist of Havoc. Nothing too fancy here, guys. Trust me, this exotic really won't see much use even next season unless there's a change here to Eternal Warrior directly. Just getting an overshield on Supercast is not worth your exotic slot. And if you're thinking about swapping to this exotic before popping your super, think again. Bungie already has modifiers in the game that depletes your entire subclass when swapping exotics, depending on the content that you're in. And this is to, of course, combat this issue right here. With that being said though, Synthoceps is a beautiful option here for Fist of Havoc. Number one, it buffs super damage as a whole. It comes with the perk Bionic Enhancements, where you have increased melee lunge range and improved melee and super damage when you're surrounded. Now, this damage increases for supers is a 50% buff. I know, Synthoceps and our glaive builds were destroyed, but in terms of super damage, it's beautiful. That 50% buff would be on top of the 33% buff that the heavy attack is getting. Like in my mind, I'm imagining the possibilities of this being a mega DPS super and potentially next season be at the top of the rankings, which we will have pre and post tests for. And considering that Fist of Havoc is such a close quarter combat super, you are always going to be proccing Bionic Enhancements. And on top of that, the perk does persist even when you're outside of being surrounded, at least for a little bit. Now, if you want to go the survivability route, the exotic of choice for Fist of Havoc is Insurmountable Skullfort. This exotic was already good, but now it's about to be disgusting. With perks like Transfusion Matrix, where kills with arc melee abilities trigger health regeneration and restore melee energy, this will allow you to have health regeneration right in your back pocket, as Fist of Havoc's attacks will proc health regeneration. Plus, the helmet is just good on its own. When it comes to synergizing with neutral game abilities, it's second to none for the art class. But Cross, what about point contact cannon brace? Fellas, if you came into this video hoping at some point I would say that exotic will be good, think again. That exotic is the shiniest of shines, and if I could reveal my true feelings about this exotic without being demonetized on YouTube, I would. With that being said though, Insurmountable Skullfort, absolutely meta. Now on to the next super that's getting buffed in Season 21 for Titans, we have Glacial Quake. Now this super summons a Stasis Gauntlet, which gives you a light attack and a heavy attack to work with. The heavy attack has you slam your gauntlet down to create a shockwave that freezes targets and then sends out these stasis crystals to freeze additional ones. Now, while the light attack supercharges your Shiver Strike for bonus damage, you can sprint through stasis crystals or frozen targets to then shatter them instantly. Now, there's really not too much going on here except for a 20% light attack buff, which is still nice. points. There's also going to be an increase in Shiver Strike thrust speed while in Super by 10%. Now, this is meant to make Shiver Strike attack in the Super feel more useful compared to the much heavier damage dealing heavy attack. Now, whether or not these changes will really make that much of a difference when it comes to difficult content, especially in-game PvE, we'll just have to wait and see. No one's really jumping up to use Glacial, Quake, and GM content. But when there's not any synergies between Glacial, Quake, and exotic armor, there's no direct way to buff it like there is for other subclasses. Sure, we have Cadmus-Rich Landscap, and of course Hoarfrost, but those don't really directly correlate with the Titan Stasis Super. And even if they did, let's be real guys, they're kinda mid. I'm just saying. We did a review here recently on Cadmus Ridge, and we try to find a lot here to make it synergize, but it's just not that crazy. Now, quickly moving on to Void though, and specifically Sentinel Shield, this roaming super is actually getting a solid 20% damage increase in PvE. What most people don't know about is that this roaming super might have the most utility out of all of them, which is why it's already a decent option. Not only because it allows you to attack in multiple ways, but it also offers up some defensive and offensive options for your allies. It comes equipped with a shoulder charge light attack as your roam, the ability to throw your shield mid-super, and the ability to guard to create a defensive wall. Allies who shoot through that wall also have increased weapon damage, and then guarding allies makes the shield last longer. The super combined with the Void kit is great, and shield throws literally give you overshields, which also got a buff inside of PvE. And what's so beautiful about overshields too, especially on this class, is that with offensive bulwark, overshields buff your grenade and melee regeneration. And if you combine this with controlled demolition, enemies will become volatile when you hit them with an ability. And considering you can cast your shield throw mid-super, you've got access to a bunch of Void verbs while in this super. And again, this is all without the exotic and in its current form. So a 20% buff on top of this is going to be beautiful for the Titan Void kit. As far as exotic synergies though for this, you've got a ton of options. You've got Helm of Saint-14, which can be used for both Void Titan supers. For Sentinel Shield specifically, its Starless Night perk will blind nearby enemies when you're guarding with your Sentinel Shield, right? Now this can be useful if you're protecting your team while moving or while your team is shooting through your shield when enemies are also rushing you, as they'll become blinded when they get close. But keep in mind, if you're really trying to take advantage of the blocking capabilities of the super, you really want to go with Ursa Furiosa. This comes equipped with the perk Ursine Guard, where you actually move faster while guarding when Sentinel Shield is active. And guarded damage converts to super energy when the super ends. You can actually get up to 50% of your super back. And this allows you to more actively provide defensive protection for your team. I personally love it in game modes like Wellspring, where we're moving a payload. We literally pop one Ursa Titan after another, feeding each other orbs. And on top of that, we're applying weapon buffs to everyone behind the shield. Now, even though guard specifically isn't getting buffed at all next season, you still have that option to go from guarding to attacking, which is what's getting that 20% damage buff. And look, when things get crazy, like my team keeps wiping, all that stuff, there is no other exotic that I rely on more heavily than Ursa Furiosa in those moments. It's such a great defensive exotic. Now, next up is a very solid choice for Sentinel Shield users, and it's only getting better, and that is Doomfang Pauldrons. This comes with the perk Horns of Doom, where void melee kills give you super energy, approximately 10% per use. Now, while Sentinel Shield is active, melee kills recharge shield throw, which extends your super on hits, that being a 10% super energy refund. Now, this exotic is definitely benefiting from the 20% damage boost that the super is receiving. And we already spoke about how Sentinel throws really allow you to tap into the Void kit already. This exotic begs you to mix up your super attacks in order to get more shield throws, which of course gives you overshields and can cause volatile. And all of this extending the duration of your super. Now, with the buffs to shield throw that we'll talk about later, the 20% buff to Sentinel Shield damage and the 10% super energy you get per shield throw hit with this exotic, the amount of orbs you can generate is wild. Combine all of that with something like hands-on, and you've got a very good super with tons of options, both offensive and defensive, with incredibly fast super regeneration. Now, we can take this a step further. If we want to just purely amplify the damage of the super, we can also utilize Synthoceps. And again, like we previously mentioned it with Fist of Havoc, you get that 50% damage bonus to super damage on top of the 20% buff given here to Sentinel. The damage is nice, guys. And again, we're going to be showing everything pre and post, and we'll see where everything lies in terms of rankings. Now, last but not least, my Solar Hammer Titans. Oh, how forgotten we feel. The Hammer of Soul Super is seeing a slight damage increase of 10%. Now, this super has you summoning a flaming hammer to wreak destruction down upon your enemies. And upon impact, your hammers shatter into explosive molten shards. And this super is combined with the goated Soul Invictus, and of course, Roaring Flames, which is already so good. And Bungie wanted to give the super a little bit more damage to help its usability in terms of just pure damage dealing situations. Roaring Flames already has the ability to buff all of your solar super damage. So again, if you're chaining solar kills or even just getting kills with your super, you're buffing your damage with Roaring Flames. So Roaring Flames at max stacks on top of the 10% buff, guys, it's hefty. Now, upon popping the super, a sunspot is created at your location. And while standing in sunspots, your super drains more slowly, allowing you to get off more hammers per super. Not only that, but every hammer of soul kill creates yet another sunspot, allowing you to jump from one sunspot to another, making this a roaming super that can still take advantage of that reduction in super drain. Now, our other hammer super is Burning Maul, aka Spin to Win. It's getting a bigger buff. Burning Maul summons a flaming maul to crush enemies with force of an earthquake. You can even spin the maul in a circle around you over and over, which is the line attack, damaging nearby targets, or you can slam the maul to the ground for its heavy attack. This creates a cyclone of flames that seeks targets. Now, this super hasn't really been that popular. I remember at one time inside of PvP, everyone hated it because it could track you around walls. It was pretty nutty. At one time too, we were utilizing it in things like Gambit because its damage output was pretty good, especially with Roaring Flames. But it's also getting a 10% increase in damage. Plus, it will now create a sunspot on cast when Soul Invictus is equipped, matching the behavior of Hammer of Soul. So you're actually able to synergize something that used to be specific to just Hammer of Soul. Now, the other big benefit is that the heavy attack Cyclone will now apply Scorch over time, meaning Burning Maul will be the only Titan super that dips into the solar verbs. Now, first off, creating a sunspot on cast with Soul Invictus is great. This allows you to do more damage on top of the 10% buff and have your super for longer. Again, that's the beautiful thing here, guys. This is gonna last longer when in that sunspot. And then being able to apply Scourge with the heavy attack equals to more damage with that chance of ignition over time. And you can imagine the fragment combinations here to really amplify getting the most out of Scorch and those ignitions. But the other beautiful thing here is that this actually gives Burning Maul the potential to stun unstoppable champions with ignitions. Now, for exotic pairings that are going to be the best here for our solar supers, we have quite a few. Synthoceps once again, which is fantastic for buffing our super damage. On top of that, it buffs our melee damage by 200%. And considering most of us love to use Bonk, this exotic is fantastic. Now, when it comes to buffing our solar super specifically though, we've got Hallowfire Heart, equipped with the perk Sunfire Furnace, which improves the recharge rate of your solar abilities. It greatly improves recharge rates while your super is charged. Now, we did an amazing build earlier this season that absolutely wrecks. It takes advantage of our artifact mods, double fireball grenades. It's deadly. But when it comes to the specific buffs our solar supers are getting, this exotic kind of goes against it because you are more or less wanting to hold onto your super with this exotic, as it increases your ability to regeneration by 350%. But in those cases where you are using this exotic and you do pop your super, like here in that Harry situation, well, now you're going to be dealing more damage. I know. Cross, you literally just said this exotic buffs your supers. It doesn't. I just wanted a reason to just say Hallowfire Heart is amazing. Now, we also have Phoenix Cradle, which comes with the perk Beacons of Empowerment, where Soul Invictus lasts twice as long. And allies who pass through your sunspots are granted Soul Invictus and Solar Restoration. And while this exotic doesn't specifically state that it buffs solar supers, it does buff our sunspots, which in turn helps our survivability and is actually fantastic for our teammates. Simultaneously, it reduces our super drain, which can equal out to more damage. Now, this exotic makes the buff from sunspots last twice as long, approximately 5 seconds to now 10 seconds. It also gives Soul Invictus buffs to allies who pass through their sunspots, and they'll receive 100% additional base grenade and melee regeneration. It is such a good support exotic that so many of us, myself included, completely forgot about. As well as the restoration, the decreased passive super drain. Not only does this exotic provide a chance to deal more damage thanks to the buff Soul Invictus, but it is a tier 1 exotic for supporting and buffing allies. Now, I do want to mention here at the end of the super section that Crest of Alpha Lupi is also an option for everyone using any of these roaming supers. All roaming supers are able to generate 2 more orbs than non-roaming supers. This was a buff Bungie made at the beginning of Lightfall, and this exotic increases that by an additional orb, while also adding the extra benefit of a healing pulse when activating your barricade. Again, nothing too meta here, but it is some synergy that you can dip into, especially after these buffs go live. And of course, it applies to all supers. Now, that is our changes for roaming Titan supers for next season. Now let's jump into our abilities. Seismic Strike, Shield Bash, and Hammer Strike are all getting hits with a big change. A lot of people are upset about this, but it will essentially cost you 15% melee energy on activation, whether they hit an enemy or not. Now this change is happening because Bungie feels that these shoulder charge abilities provide too much free movement capabilities, and that there should be a trade-off in order to not punish the players who use these abilities primarily for offense. To offset these changes though, they're adjusting the overall base cooldowns to be standardized at 91 seconds, and they were previously ranged from 101 seconds to 114. Again though, the movement part of it, that's what's getting hit the most. And yes, that one does hurt because I use it all the time. Now based on your strength stat, the effective cooldown on shoulder charge as a movement tool will range from 17 seconds at 0 strength down to around 7 seconds at 100 strength. Now there's really not much to touch on in terms of exotic synergies. The main thing I do want to mention here is that if you're looking to counter this with melee kickstart, think again. Again, that perk only activates when you fully expend your ability, thus meaning it will not work here unless of course you use your shoulder charge completely when you hit an enemy. You follow me guys? It's only taking away 15%, therefore not proccing. We had a lot of people in that video the other day stating, hey, I'll just use 3 kickstart mods. Not gonna work, unfortunately. But moving on, the knockout arc aspect is seeing some changes. Knockout infuses your melee attack with arc energy and increases your melee range and damage for a short time after you critically wound a target or break their shield. Now the launch range is being reduced by 1 meter from 6.5 meters to 5.5, and this is going to mainly target PvP. But to offset this for PvE, the uncharged melee damage bonus is going from 60% to 100%. Now there's really no exotic that is focused around uncharged melees. More often than not, you're using charged melees or building around certain melee abilities. I guess you can bring in Wormgod Crest here. This exotic comes with the perk Burning Fist, where melee kills increase melee damage for a period of time, approximately 5 seconds. And additional kills extend the duration, increase its effects. And at 5 stacks, you're getting a 275 increase in melee damage. And this works with your uncharged melee, and currently stacks with this 60% uncharged melee damage bonus from knockouts. So essentially at times 5, with knockouts, you're looking around 61,000 damage versus Carl. And with the buff knockout is getting for uncharged melees, that damage will go up somewhere around 76,000. Again, this is for an uncharged melee. Again though, I'm not gonna really go out of my way to utilize such a thing. The point is to use your charged melees as often as you can. No one's throwing their bonk hammer and just saying, the hell with picking it up. I've got my uncharged fist. Now next up, we have the Sentinel shield throw. Bungie's actually gonna be increasing the consistency of finding and adjusting initial trajectory of the Sentinel throw, as well as finding targets after it bounces. The idea here is so that it will hit enemies and will bounce more consistently to the next enemy. And the reason why this is big is we just talked about how amazing Doomfang is, but you don't want a situation in which you throw a shield, and this can occasionally happen. Now it hits an enemy and then it just kind of bounces to the ground, or at least shoot off into the stratosphere somewhere. It's also getting its base impact damage increased from 60 to 70, which is very nice. Now again, I know we already covered Doomfang, but another exotic that is actually really good is Second Chance. This strictly buffs your shield throw ability, and the Myrmidon's reach gives you a second shield throw and makes your shield throws stun barrier champions. This exotic is only going to get better. Now the Strand Melee Frenzied Blade is also seeing some changes. It's getting a decreased cooldown based on how many melee charges the player has stored. At 0 charges, the cooldown is reduced by 15%, and at 2 charges, the cooldown is reduced by 30%. Frenzied Blade is a melee ability that has 3 total charges. It also has you slashing forward at targets in front of you, causing Sever. And again, Sever significantly reduces outgoing damage that enemies deal. Now we've got plenty of exotics here that synergize, whether that's Synthoceps, Wormgod Crest. You also have ACDC Feedback, which of course you can pair with any melee, and it comes with the perk Fury Conductors, where melee hits build energy, and being struck by a melee reduces incoming damage and unleashes the energy in a devastating explosion. Now when you get a melee hit, you'll be granted a stack of Fury Conductors with a max stack of 3. Now these grant melee damage resist and increases arc explosion damage based on the amount of stacks. 1 stack is 33% melee damage resist and 100% increase in explosion damage. 2 stacks is 55% melee damage resist and 200% increase explosion damage. And 3 stacks is 70% melee damage resist and 300% increase explosion damage. And essentially having 3 melee charges with Strand will let you get the max stack of Fury Conductors if that's a route you want to take. Personally though guys, there's a lot of better options out there that buffs Frenzied Blades way more. Feedback, although very fun, is super niche. Now I know throughout all of this we have not mentioned Heart of Inmost Light even once, and it's still a good exotic. Granted, not to the degree that it was back in Season of the Plunder, but for Strand type, Lions here, there is a play to be made. You can kind of spam your melee abilities in order to empower your other abilities because you have 3 charges of them. Heart of Inmost Light's perk is Overflowing Light, where using an ability empowers the other 2. And empower means abilities have faster regeneration, and melee and grenades do more damage. And having 3 melee charges here pretty much allows you to not worry about the order in which you use your abilities, which is the opposite of what Bungie wanted with the Heart of Inmost Light nerf back in Lightfall's launch. This is because they don't want it to be too easy to proc Empower ×2. They want you to prioritize having ×2 for one ability, forcing you into a specific order. But considering you're on Strand Titan with 5 abilities instead of just 3, it's way easier to maintain that ×2 empowerment. This reduction in melee cooldown when lightly stacked with the cooldown reduction gain from Heart of Inmost Light, giving you more melee charges even faster. Now lastly, Bungie is adjusting the tick damage that sunspots deal to enemy players in PvP from 17 to 22. Now this is meant to make all sunspots a safer haven for players while also encouraging enemies to keep their distance. Now we're not back to the same amount of damage we were doing pre 3.0. We're literally like touching a sunspot, enemies would just disintegrate, but it's still a buff. And then on top of that, if you pair this with things like Loreley, which pretty much auto pops sunspots when you're critically wounded, as well as giving you restoration, in some ways this is going to be a nice little buff here for just Loreley specifically. And let me just say, Loreley really is a forgotten exotic. And in terms of survivability for both PvE and PvP, Loreley with Cauterizing Flame is fantastic. So tagging on the extra damage there from sunspots is only going to make this exotic better. So guys, there you have it. That is all the changes coming to the Titan in terms of roaming supers and abilities next season. If you haven't checked out our video for Hunters, feel free to check that one out. A link to that will be in the description below. We're also working on our Warlock video. That should be out soon as well. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching. And as always,
slap that like button like your mama told you right.